Hello, everybody. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2023 Genesis Invitational Data Dive Show. We have a lot to get into, a lot of prior leaderboards to look at to see what statistics and metrics we want to focus on this week for the Genesis Invitational. I am interested to hear if you all have fired off any wagers. If so, which ones? So jump into chat. Would love to hear from you all in that regard. Also, if you have looked at the DK pricing, who are you gravitating towards early on this week? Who might you be fading? All that good stuff. So we have a lot to discuss. Let's not waste any more time. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from FantasyNational.com. It is the best tool out there for your money. It's going to make you a much better gambler and a much smarter DFS player. Go check them out. It's simply well worth your investment. In the description to the video, there are links to all of my social media. This is Twitter and Instagram, where I posted some research earlier this evening regarding some pattern of the former winners, or at least 10 of the past 11 winners of the Genesis, dating back to 2012. So there is that research out on both of those sites. So if you want to see that, give me a follow at those places. And then my link to the Twitch channel, or my Twitch channel, is in the description as well. This is where I do all of my in-depth research, like I was doing this morning, to find said pattern for those winners. I also looked at last week's waste management statistics, covered my lineups, all of that, my mixed condition model. So if you want to see a lot of the in-depth research that I do, as well as the baseball content that will start up here fairly soon, and a lot of the showdown content, or at least the inner workings of the showdown content, is over there on Twitch as well. So if you're interested in that, give me a follow over there. And then finally, we're live, chat's open. Again, I want to hear if you have made any wagers. I certainly have placed a couple of numbers that I really liked. A lot of the industry seems to be pretty split on where they're going this week. So would love to hear from you all in that regard. What statistics do you think are going to be most prominent this week at Riviera Country Club? How excited are you in general that Tiger is teeing it up? So a lot to discuss, a lot to get into. Let's dig into the weeds of the data for the 2023 Genesis Invitational. And we're going to start where we should have last night, and that's the GCSAA tournament fact sheet. It came out earlier today. We are in Pacific Palisades, California, essentially right outside Los Angeles. Riviera is set up as a par 71 that measures a little over 7,300 yards. 7,322 is the unofficial listed yardage. The stimp is 12 and a half. So that is very, very fast, almost pushing lightning. However, we did see last night in the historic conditions that these greens have never been labeled lightning speed. So it'll be interesting to see if indeed they are labeled that this year, but we can pretty much guarantee that they are going to be at least fast. They have always been listed as fast. The greens are quite large, 7,500 square feet on average. You have quite a bit of fairway. However, the average fairway width is only 27 yards, and these fairways do undulate, slope a little bit, quite a bit of rough. Also contributes to the low amount of fairways that are hit, as we saw last night in the course breakdown over on Fantasy National. I mentioned last night, but here is confirmation. These greens are POA. So all POA putting courses, the Pebble Beach, Torrey Pines, Chapultepec, those places would be a good reference to see who traditionally puts well on POA. But the difference with Riviera than most courses is that the fairway and rough is Kikuyu. And the thing with Kikuyu is it is very sticky grass. It is difficult to play out of. So while around the green is going to be a factor, I've been tossing some ideas around on what I should do with that specific metric in my head all during the day. So we'll probably look at that metric in a few different ways. The original architect, George Thomas, has been renovated most recently by Tom Fazio. But really, Riviera has not changed all that much in really 30 years or so. So the big takeaways, again, a pretty long par 71. Again, I'm not going to do anything with over 7,400 yards as the course isn't to that extent. But it is still a fairly long course. The greens are always fast POA. I might even add the lightning in case the greens are sped up a little bit more so than usual. The greens are larger than average tour greens. Not a lot of bunkers, no water hazards on the course. It is just long and difficult and narrow at points. So there's a look at Genesis, or at Riviera, the Genesis Invitational from a GCSA tournament fact sheet. Before we move to Fantasy National, I did bring up Windfinder, and as of now, and I will go ahead and reload the page, we don't have the super forecast available yet for Thursday, but there looks to be very little wind, at least in terms of an extended forecast. Now, Saturday might have a little bit into the afternoon, but what we are most concerned about would be Thursday and Friday for cut purposes, and I just don't see a whole lot of wind, or at least there's none in the forecast. So nothing to do with wind as of now, and of course we will reevaluate this on Wednesday evening during the DFS Tactics show. But again, just for your information, no wind to factor into the metrics this evening. So with that, let's go ahead and move on over to Fantasy National. And you can see I was doing some research on one particular player, as you saw there. But I have went ahead and set this for the beginning of the PGA Tour season. I do not have any other filters put in place at the moment. Let's just take a look and see who are the best strokes gained approach players since the start of this PGA Tour season, dating back to the Fortinet. Those players are Tom Hoge, Nick Hardy, Russell Knox, Tony Finau, Ricky Fowler, Tom Kim, Adam Hadwin, Brendan Steele, Colin Morikawa, Sam Ryder, and Siwoo Kim. Important to note, there have been 3 or 4 field changes. Maverick McNeely is not in the field. Webb Simpson has withdrawn, and there's Chris Kirk has withdrawn. I know of those 3. I think there is a 4th one. It's escaping me at the moment. So if you know that, put it in chat. It will refresh my memory and let the community know. But I do know those 3 have withdrawn. Maverick McNeely, Webb Simpson, and Chris Kirk have all withdrawn from the Genesis Invitational. So now that we've looked at strokes gained approach, I am going to expand the timeline here. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning of 2020, and we're going to look at some putting metrics here. So POA, and even though every single round here at the Genesis has been labeled as fast, I'm really, really toying with the idea of adding lightning, but again, it's always been considered fast, so it could very well be a mistake to put the lightning filter in with it. Like I said, I am kind of torn because that stimp meter is very, very high. But I'm just going to look at fast POA for the moment. So your top fast POA putters since the start of 2020 have been Kevin Kisner, Denny McCarthy, Adam Scott, Matt Kuchar, Mackenzie Hughes, Troy Merritt, JT Poston, Jordan Spieth, Sepp Straka, and Harris English. And again, note I skipped Maverick McNeely. He has withdrawn. So there's a look at your top putters in the past 3 or so years on POA greens. Last night, in the initial research, we did not do anything with scoring metrics. I am a little bit more comfortable adding the scoring difficult to par metric, or filter, for this week. And the reason being is from last year's mixed condition model that we will evaluate later on in the show when we move to Microsoft Excel. But the more I looked at it, and again, just looking from a historical perspective, last year played average. You even had one round of easy, but majority of the time you have average to difficult rounds. And then a couple of easy rounds might mix in here and there. But generally speaking, it has been difficult. And we saw that in the course breakdown in terms of the cut line. The winning score here, generally between maybe minus 12 to minus 16 or so. So that generally rates out as average or on the more difficult end of average. So I am going to use the difficult filter tonight. And it will probably be used as a tiebreaker for some things. Not entirely convinced I'm going to use it in the mixed condition model. But again, I will explain why I'm using the difficult filter later on when we move to Microsoft Excel. So, since the start of 2012, your top performers when a round has been difficult to par have been Rory McIlroy, Scotty Scheffler, Matt Fitzpatrick, Keegan Bradley, Will Zalatoris, Max Homa, Sung Jae, Justin Thomas, Shane Lowry, and John Rahm. And in fact, the Waste Management contributed to that a little bit, as we did this earlier today over on Twitch this morning, but sorry, something on my nose itching. The first round was labeled difficult this past week at TPC Scottsdale, so that round obviously has been included in these rankings. But anyway, so there's your top performers when a round has been difficult. I also want to see strokes gained around the green in that regard as well. So your top strokes gained around the green players when a round is difficult. In that same time frame, dating back to the beginning of 2022, Lucas Herbert, Tommy Fleetwood, Matt Kuchar, Billy Horschel, Francesco Molinari, Jordan Spieth, Siwoo Kim, Wyndham Clark, Brian Harmon, and Jason Day. Again, Chris Kirk has withdrawn, so Chris Kirk, Maverick McNeely, Webb Simpson, and I know there is one more, and it is escaping me at the moment, and I apologize for that. But as I mentioned, there are a few different ways I want to look at strokes gained around the green. So I'm going to remove the difficult filter, and I'm going to go back to the beginning of 2020 again. Let's take a look at strokes gained around the green on POA. That absolutely can be a factor. A lot of times you might think about it in terms of scrambling, and we'll certainly do that as well. But I do want to see strokes gained around the green on POA. Unfortunately, there is no rough grass, Kikuyu, Bermuda, anything like that. All we have is the rough length, which is generally short. But this rough is tricky to play out of because it is Kikuyu. So the best we're going to get, I believe, for strokes gained around the green is POA. And we'll definitely look at scrambling with that too. But your top strokes gained around the green players on POA greens. In fact, you know what? Let me add fast. Let's just do on fast POA greens and just keep it consistent with the putting. So your top strokes gained around the green players on fast POA greens. Those players are Luke Donald, Ches Reavie, Ricky Fowler, Brian Harmon, Martin Laird, Danny Willett, Robbie Shelton, Francesco Molinari, Adam Hadwin, and Patrick Cantlay. So I did want to take a look at a little bit of some strokes gained around the green with POA, fast POA specifically. We took a look at strokes gained around the green, difficult approach. We can take a look at strokes gained approach when it's difficult as well. Certainly a worthwhile venture to do. So, when a round is difficult, your top strokes gained approach players since the beginning of 2022 have been Max Homa, Scotty Scheffler, Brennan Steele, Tom Hoagie, John Rahm, Xander Schauffele, Nick Taylor, Corey Connors, Sung Jae, and Colin Morikawa. So with that, I believe that is going to be it for the review of last night, if you will. I know we looked at off the tee when fairways were difficult to hit, but again, the more I look at it, the more I don't think off the tee is really going to be much of a factor this week. So I'd rather spend this time finding what we think is going to be the most important factor. So we're going to start with the fairways and the greens, the driving statistics. Let's move on over to prior leaderboards. And before we go to the driving statistics, let's just kind of take a look here in terms of strokes gained and where a lot of the top performers, at least this year, last year's 2022 convenient top 20 for ties. You see only 3 were negative in terms of strokes gained. Putting, you had quite a bit around the green as well. Off the tee was clearly the least important in terms of the raw numbers or raw number of players who were negative. You had 5 players that were negative in terms of off the tee. And if you look, you had a 5.9 in strokes gained off the tee and some middling to little success here. Approach, much higher, to be expected, 7.1. Around the green, 7.2. Now you do have a lot of, middling to clunker finishes here, but you also got some very, very high ones. Your winner was second in strokes gained around the green. You had top 10s. You had your runner-up a little bit further down here in Colin Morikawa. So the highest number has been in strokes gained around the green. It's going to end up in putting as an 8.4. But not, I would say it's probably about the same level of correlation just due to the fact that you have a missed cut this high up in terms of the putting. But there is a lot of correlation here. Maverick McNeely, a top 10, a top 5, 2 runner-ups, some more top 10s. So putting is going to be a big factor as well, as it generally is on POA. If players are good on POA, they're generally POA specialists. Generally speaking, there are exceptions, but generally POA specialists. So around the green actually had a higher strokes gained approach total value than approach. So important to see that, and I want to do one more year for you all just to emphasize this point. We will look at the top 19 just due to ties. You can see putting, there's only 3 players that are negative, and no one was lower than a negative 0.6, so putting is a big deal here at Riviera. Again, off the tee has 6 players that are negative. Around the green does have 4. One of them is essentially field average, and 2 more negative 0.6s. And then again, as we go across, you've got some high missed cuts that performed well off the tee. So it's just not that important of a factor here at Riviera. 3.9 being the highest there. You got a 7.6 and fairly strong. 4.8 and quite a few miscuts. So this could look to be an outlier, because look at all of the high success or high leaderboard success around that, around those miscuts. So perhaps 2021's an outlier here. And then the putting 8.2 and pretty strong correlation. But I did want to show you the strokes gained prior leaderboards just to get a feel for it. Let's move to the driving page view. Fairways and greens. And even though Joaquin Niemann, your defending champion, who is not here because of live reasons, distance is a pretty big factor here. Even though he was negative, you only had 3 other players that were negative in terms of driving distance throughout the week. 2 of them were less than 10 in driving distance for the entire week. So essentially pretty darn close to field average. Now Ches Reavie's never going to be long or gain in driving distance, so take that what you will. He had a fantastic tournament in other regards. But distance is a big thing. Distance is a big thing here at Riviera. And greens as well. Even though these are bigger than the average tour green, they will not play that way because they are tiered, they are undulating, they have severe fall-offs. Greens in regulation are going to be a pretty big deal, I think, this week. And that's why I'm going to be focusing on greens as opposed to good drives or fairways, especially since fairways just don't seem to matter, and off the tee in general just doesn't seem to matter with the exception of distance. So if we sort, again, you have a miscut from Seamus Power, but around him and above him, there's a lot of success here. You do have a clunker from Cameron Champ, a few clunkers in here, but you got your 2 runner-ups, top 10s, top 25, top 15. So driving distance, a pretty big factor. We look at greens, 10.9, and look at that correlation. All the way down to Joaquin Niemann here. You've got a clunker from James Hall and a clunker from Vegas, Johnny Vegas. No one else is outside the top 40. So the top, I don't know, maybe what's this, 15 or so performers in greens and regulation. They all made the cut. They all generally were T40 or better. So a lot to do with greens last year. Let's take a look at 2021. Do the same. Now, in 2021, the first 5 were negative in terms of distance. But again, an emphasis on Finau being essentially field average. Cameron Smith was pretty darn close to field average. Now, Sam Burns did not gain distance at all, which is surprising because he has plenty of distance off the tee. It's just interesting to see that week he just didn't have distance. So maybe he chose to hit irons or woods or whatever. So a little bit less in terms of distance for 2021. But if you sort, again, you have a miscut from Tim Whiting, but below him, or right below him and above him, there's a lot of success here. Top 10s, top 5, top 20, top 15. So distance is a thing. Greens, 14.3 from John Rahm. And coming down, we'll go down to Hovland. So the top 10 or so is this 3, 6, 9, top 11 in greens and regulation were all T43 or better. If you take out Colin Morikawa, they were all T26 or better. So the more I looked at it today, the more I believe greens and regulation are going to be a pretty big deal. So when we come over to this year's field, and I am going to let's go with a couple of different things here. First thing I want to do is just get a feel for how players have played so far on the PGA Tour this year. So with no filters, And again, just double checking myself to make sure there are no filters. Let's just take a look at driving distance and greens and regulation in that regard. So your top 10 driving distance players so far this PGA Tour season, dating back to the Fortinet: Wyndham Clark, Cameron Champ, Ben On, Callum Tarrant, Joseph Bramlett, Thomas Detry, Luke List, Cameron Young, Trey Mullinax, and Gary Woodland. Interestingly enough, none of those 10 are top 10 in greens in regulation. So your top greens in regulation gained players since the start of the PGA Tour season have been Scotty Scheffler, Colin Morikawa, Jason Day, Emiliano Grillo, John Rahm, Hayden Buckley, Alex Smalley, Kevin Yu, Nick Hardy, and Tony Finau. So again, no overlap here, but some good honorable mentions. Scotty Scheffler, top 25 in distance, first in greens. Honorable mention. John Rahm's top 15 in distance and 5th in greens. You've got Kevin Yu, very high in both. I'd give an honorable mention to Nick Hardy as well. He's top 30 in distance. And then a little bit further down here, you've got Will Gordon, 13th and 14th, so very good at both of those. Garrick Higgles, 25th in distance, 17th in greens. So good in that regard as well. Now, if we want to add some filters, I'm gonna look at 2 different filters throughout the night. First one being difficult. So, when a round is difficult, your top greens in regulation gained players since the start of 2022 have been Alex Smalley, John Rahm, Xander, Rory McIlroy, Corey Connors, Scotty Scheffler, Shane Lowry, Sung Jae, Tony Finau, and Brendan Steele. Quite a few of those players are also very respectable in distance when it's difficult. Having said that, I think if I want to look at anything specific with driving distance, I'm probably going to look at driving distance when hitting the fairway is difficult. So, when fairways have been difficult to hit since the start of 2022, your top driving distance players have been Joseph Bramlett, Rory McIlroy, Cameron Champ, Wyndham Clark, Trey Mullinax, Cam Young, Callum Tarrant, Thomas Detry, John Rahm, Scotty Scheffler, and Justin Thomas. Again, I don't know how much I'm going to go with distance as in using a filter. I'm probably just going to look at driving distance since the start of the PGA Tour season. I could be convinced to look at greens when it's difficult, because generally speaking, the Genesis has been difficult. These greens will be hard to hit as it is because of the severity in slope. They are tiered. They have massive fall-offs, as in false fronts or edges and whatnot. So I could see myself wanting to look at greens when it's difficult. The last thing I want to look here on this specific page view, we'll look at scrambling, and I'll look at it when it's difficult as well. So let's take a look at scrambling gained when it's difficult. Your top scramblers when a round's difficult: Matt Fitzpatrick, Denny McCarthy, Christian Bezadenhout, Billy Horschel, Tommy Fleetwood, Matt Kuchar, Lucas Herbert, Sung Jae, Shane Lowry, and Jason Day. But I believe we did this as well for the Pebble Beach Pro-Am. Let's take a look at scrambling on fast POA, because putting is still a part of scrambling. So I want to look at POA. I want to look at fast POA. And again, we'll have to go all the way back to the beginning of 2020. But your top scramblers on fast POA greens since the start of 2020 have been Adam Hadwin, Brian Harmon, Kevin Kisner, Francesco Molinari, Mackenzie Hughes, Matthias Schwab, Sam Burns, Matthew Neesmith, Danny Willett, and Wyndham Clark. How much am I going to do with scrambling? I don't really know, because when we looked at the course breakdown last night, players are generally pretty successful at scrambling here at Riviera. Now, 3 putts is another issue, so we'll definitely want to look at 3 putts this evening, and that's probably contributing to the fact that we saw 0 to 5 feet have kind of a spiky number, if you will, a pretty high number. But I'm not sure how much I want to focus on scrambling because players are generally successful here. So having that debate with myself, and will continue to do so over the next 2 days as I prepare my mixed condition model. But I'm going to reset these filters. Definitely going to bring this back to the beginning of the PGA Tour season and prepare for the scoring tab. Birdies and bogeys. And we saw last night in Microsoft Excel that bogey avoidance was just the thing here at the Genesis. And it makes sense if rounds are going to be difficult, pars being good scores. If you can avoid a bogey, you're going to be gaining ground on the field. So we look at last year's leaderboard. Now your winner doubled birdies over bogeys. Let's see, the top birdies gained was an 8.7. You do have a missed cut fairly high up here, but surrounded by some very heavy correlation around him. 8.7. Bogeys was only a 7.3, but again, look at the correlation. You don't have any missed cuts very high on the bogey avoidance rankings. You do have some clunker-made cuts, but no missed cuts like you did with Vincent Whaley on the birdies gained. If I sort back on the actual leaderboard, again, for the top 20, just due to ties, you do have 1 player that's negative in bogey avoidance. You have 2 that are negative in birdies gained. So it's fairly close from last year. It's fairly close. Winner was double in the birdies. More birdies here, but then you had bogeys. Bogeys here. Bogeys there. Again, fairly even. Maybe even a slight lean to birdies gained last year because your winner doubled up in the birdies. But you had the better correlation in the bogeys. 2021. We'll look at the scoring page view. Top 19 due to ties. Now, nobody was negative in terms of birdies gained. 1 was negative in bogeys. Individual numbers here, 7. And some very, very elite correlation high on the leaderboard. But you had an 8.1 and some pretty elite correlation as well. So maybe the bogeys avoided. In fact, your winner was slightly more bogeys. Bogeys here, bogeys there. Lots of bogey avoidance there. So it's very, very close. Again, I am tending to lean to the bogeys. And this is kind of a pretty good tiebreaker here. 2020, you had as many as 3 players in the top 22 negative in terms of birdies gained. None of the top 22 were negative in terms of bogeys avoided. 7.7, but your winner did lead in that category. 5.9, but again, a whole lot of elite correlation minus Mark Leishman. Whereas in the birdies gained, you've got some pretty big numbers and a high miscut. So I'm thinking I'm thinking bogeys avoided. It's a lot closer than I thought it was, given what we saw in Microsoft Excel last night, granted. But I'm still leaning towards bogeys. So I'm just going to look from a start of the PGA Tour kind of view. No filters as of now. Your top bogey avoiders this PGA Tour season have been Jason Day, Scotty Scheffler, Siwoo Kim, Thomas Detry, Andrew Putnam, John Rahm, Tony Finau, Brian Harmon, Adam Hadwin, and Aaron Baddeley. Maverick McNeely has withdrawn. I'm going to be looking probably at bogeys when it's difficult. I am still not convinced that this week's tournament will be difficult, especially if the wind forecast stays as it is. But I am pretty confident that it's going to be more difficult than easy on that average scale, if you will. So your top bogey avoiders when a round is difficult have been Rory McIlroy, Matt Fitzpatrick, Shane Lowry, Sung Jae, Scotty Scheffler, Tom Hoagie, Tony Finau, Brendan Todd, Tommy Fleetwood, and Matt Kuchar. And something that just kind of crossed my mind here, we can look at bogey avoidance on Fast POA. I don't know how much that is going to, I don't know if that would lead us astray or point us in the right path. It's just something that we can look at. I, myself, am going to prefer to look at bogey avoidance when it's difficult to par. But if you want to look at bogey avoidance on POA greens, specifically fast POA greens, since the start of 2020, your top bogey avoiders on fast POA greens have been Xander, Rory McIlroy, Matthew NeSmith, Adam Hadwin, Russell Henley, Victor Hovland, Brian Harmon, Chez Reavie, Cameron Young, Nick Taylor. So it would have been 11, skipping Matt McNeely because he has withdrawn. So there's a look at where I am thinking, or what I'm thinking about using in my mixed condition model this week. Definitely going to be looking at bogey avoidance. I'll be doing so probably with this difficult filter put on. Again, nothing to do with long courses. Even though this is stretched to 7,300 yards, it doesn't fall outside the parameter of being a long course, i.e., over 7,400. I think it's a little too early in the week to justify using calm winds, although that is what is in the forecast as of now. So let me go and make sure I'm at the correct time frame, beginning of 2022. Let's move on to proximity and get this year's field prepped for that, and we'll look at proximity. And we talked a little bit about last night how it might be total prox. Now, the most prevalent approach shot comes from 150 to 175, but in Microsoft Excel, we saw that it didn't really lead to a whole lot of leaderboard success, or at least players that top 30'd. So I'm really wanting to see what these prior leaderboards show us in terms of proximities. And 175 to 200 are also pretty darn prevalent here. So with that, last year's leaderboard, we'll highlight the top 20. We've got a huge number here in total procs from the winner. He's not the leader. That's a pretty big number there. 1, 2, 3, looks like 6 negative in total procs. You see the 150 to 175, you got some pretty big numbers in here, but you got some pretty big negatives as well from players that finished really high. McNeely, Cameron Young, Colin Morikawa. If anything, it kind of looks like this 175 to 200 might be the most important range last year. Maybe the 125 to 150, but I just don't see anything that jumps off the page immediately in terms of the most important range. So let's kind of take a look here, go through each individual range. Now look here, total procs. The lowest name you see is Lonto. There are 5 more names down here before you hit a missed cut. So there's a lot of cut making in total procs. And look at the extreme top end of your proximity leaderboard. You have a clunker from Aaron Rai, but then Adam Scott, your leader, was 4th. Paul Casey, top 15, a runner-up, and a winner, all in the top 5 in terms of total procs. That's pretty strong. Yeah, I'll go through each one here. It's okay. I suppose 75 to 100 is okay. Yeah. 100 to 125. You got a couple high missed cuts up here. 125 to 150. You've got a whole lot of high finishes, but you got some missed cuts pretty high up here too. Okay. Most important range, or at least the most prevalent range, I don't see a whole lot here. At least from last year, you got 3 missed cuts that performed very, very well from that range, and really only 2 elite finishes, a top 5 and a top 10. So I don't see much there. 175 to 200 is decent, I suppose. And 200 plus, about like the others. So I'm still thinking it's proximity total just from last year, just due to the fact that you have a whole lot of cut makers in here and the extreme dominance at the upper end of the leaderboard. Hey P, evening. Hope your week has started off well. Thanks for jumping in chat. How did your DFS go for the waste management, considering it was the second time you were able to play DFS? Hopefully you had some success, didn't steer you wrong. Hope you listened on Tyrell Hatton and didn't listen on Emiliano Grillo and others like that. But thanks for jumping in chat and looking forward to the Genesis. So that's what I'm seeing for proximity from last year's leaderboard. Let's go 2021. Proximity. Again, top 19 here. You've got some fairly big numbers very high up here in the Prox leaderboard. And you got 5 players that were negative. Across this same 19, you only have 4 players that were negative from 125 to 150. And most of these numbers are pretty small. And you only had 4 players negative from 150 to 175. And most of those numbers are small, minus Matt Jones. Who? Let me know if you get the reference. Solid week, had too many guys make the cut, then finish outside top 30. Yep. I'm assuming players like Cameron Young, K.H. Lee, players of that ilk. I understand it. Fortunately, I had enough. Terrell Hatton, Jason Day, I had a little bit. I was really high on Ricky Fowler, and he played extremely well. I had enough of those, low to mid percentage owned players to make up for the fact that I completely full faded Justin Thomas, Scam Young. I completely full faded Thomas and Tom Kim. Thomas obviously playing very well. I knew going into it that I was going to be playing a dangerous game with that, but I still had a solid week, thanks in large part to the players like Terrell Hatton, Ricky Fowler, Jason Day. I'm trying to think of some others. There was another player that was Wyndham Clark. I was very, very high on Wyndham Clark, and he played solid for me, and I had him in a lot of my lineups as well. So if we sort on the proximities here. Now you do have a miscut a little bit higher up in terms of the total procs, but still some pretty solid overall. You got the Mike Jones reference, very good, very good. But yeah, total procs here looks pretty strong, even though the winner's not up here. You had your runner-up, a top 5, a couple of top 10s, top 5 leader. Yeah, okay. I like total procs there. But at least from the leaderboard, it looked like these 2 ranges were the most important for the guys that finished at least in the top 19. And this looks similar to the total procs. There's your winner. You had a couple of missed cuts up there, but decent little correlation. 150 to 175. I just don't see. I don't see the necessary identifiers, for lack of better terms. I don't see the necessity to single out this proximity, even though it is the proximity that leads, or that is the most prevalent or most approach shots from that range, I'm not seeing the justification for it, considering you've got a lot of missed cuts. Your winner's not up here high in the 150 to 175. Hasn't been in either year. Again, I could be wrong like I was with the Phoenix. I know I was wrong. I went with total procs last week. I'm still seeing total procs this week. However, 2020 is making me look pretty bad for that. This is the first year of the three that total procs doesn't look very strong at all. Quite a few negative here. But again, like, look at this 150 to 175. There's a lot of red in there as well. So I'm thinking it's total procs. And this is why I am just very transparent with you, my audience, that proximity is my weakest analytic skill in terms of golf. It just doesn't make a lot of sense from a statistical analyst's mind. So I am going to go with my gut again, and I'm just going to go with total procs. I'm going to remove the difficult filter. I'm going to look at just from the start of this PGA Tour season. And if there's a specific range, put it in chat and we can look at it. But I'm just going to go with total procs. So your top total procs players since the start of the PGA Tour season, back to the Fortinet in the fall. Those players have been Tom Hoge, Russell Knox, Gary Woodland, Justin Suh, K.H. Lee, Colin Morikawa, Scott Piercy, John Rahm, Brendan Steele, and Tony Finau. So yeah, that's where I'm going with proximity this week, and I think Microsoft Excel will back it up again this week, and we'll see if I, right the ship, if you will, or if I'm 0 for 2, Phoenix and Genesis, proximity not mattering. P, if you didn't catch the intro, just before I forget, I've mentioned it a couple of times. There have been 3 players that I know have withdrawn: Mav McNeely, Webb Simpson, and Chris Kirk. I know there's a 4th, and I'm forgetting who it is, so I don't want to say and lead you astray. But I do know for a fact Maverick McNeely, Webb Simpson, and Chris Kirk have all withdrawn. For some reason, I think Davis Riley is the 4th. But I don't want to set that in stone. But just for your information, in case you are looking at odds boards or early DFS, be aware that those players have withdrawn. All right, let's start moving to the par 3s, 4s, and 5s. I've been talking for quite a while, and we still have everything to do in Microsoft Excel. So let's try to speed through the 3s, 4s, and 5s. Par 3s, I don't think there's an individual range, but I do think, especially when we go to Microsoft Excel, you'll see that the par 3s have gradually been getting more important year over year here at Riviera. And if, again, look at the top 20, only 4 players are negative in terms of par 3s. You had a total of a 5.2, and pretty solid correlation here. Even around Patrick Reed, who's missed the cut, you've got top 15s, top 10s, and a runner-up around him. I'm going to go to the par 5s real quick because I want to compare 3s and 5s. So the 5s are a 5.1, roughly around the same amount of correlation, I would guess. Let's try to put my mouse here. Kramer Hickok was a miscut. Go back to the par 3s, sort Patrick Reed. So a little bit higher, okay, but generally the same in terms of par 3s and par 5s. Individual ranges, not a whole lot here. 2.8, 2.4, 2.3, and still more miscuts up in the top. 1.6. So it does not look like there is a specific length of par 3. I'll just check 2021 very, very quickly. But again, it looks like they're gaining in importance. Only 3 players are negative in terms of par 3s in 2021. Only 3 players were negative in 150 to 175. So You sort 5.7 is the total. Par 5s of the same year is a 5.7, so the same, although the winner was tops in par 5, so that definitely gives an advantage to the par 5s. But 150 to 175 is a 3.1, and you got quite a few missed cuts. 3.9. You got a lot of cut makers up here. 1.8, and a lot of success. But there's no holes that measure to this on the scorecard. I'm thinking it is just strokes gained total and par 3s. So, since the start of the PGA Tour season, no other filters, just your top par 3 performers have been Max Homa, Tom Kim, Chesson Hadley, Adam Hadwin, Billy Horschel, Matthew Neesmith, Justin Rose, John Rahm, Seamus Power, Ricky Fowler, and Grayson Sigg. Looking to the par 4s, there is one range. And I think it'll be pretty clear once we get to it. It's the 450 to 5. So if we highlight again the top 20, par 4s, they're going to be important. I didn't know how much they would be important this week. There's only one player that was negative in par 4s, and pretty big numbers, 13.2, 11.2, 10.2. But you see 450 to 5, you've got 3 that are negative, 3 really only negative in the 400 to 450 as well. 7.8 and your winner in 400 to 450. 7 in 450 to 5. You got a miscut from Hagee there. Miscut from Stanley and Hughes. I thought it was the 450 to 5. 400 to 450 might push that. If I'm remembering correctly from last night, because I believe 450 to 500 had a pretty big outlier as well. Again, look at the correlation here in par 4 performance. It's just massive. No one in the top, 15 in terms of strokes gained par 4 finished outside T32, which is very, very important. Got a 7.6, a 5.7, but your winner was higher up in this category. We'll take a look at both. Microsoft Excel is definitely going to say it's the 450 to 5. But since the start of the PGA Tour season, your top performers on all par 4s have been Scotty Scheffler, Jason Day, Taylor Montgomery, John Rahm, Thomas Detry, Brian Harmon, Tom Hoge, Tony Finau, Joel Damon, Siwoo Kim, and Ben Griffin. If you want to look at the specific links here at Riviera, Jason Day, 6th and 4th. Honorable mention to Thomas Detry, 4th and 19th. You'd probably give an honorable mention to Taylor Montgomery. He's 2nd in 400 to 450, top 30 in 450 to 500. Again, top 30 doesn't sound great, but when you have a loaded field like this and 130 players, top 30 is actually pretty darn solid. Scotty Scheffler as well, top 20 in both of the individual lengths. So put an asterisk or give some extra consideration to those guys throughout your research this week. Finally, par 5s. This one I know is just one range. It should be just the 550 to 6. So there's that correlation. Again, pretty strong in terms of total. 3.6, a 2.4, and all these miscuts here. This is just when the first hole gets moved around. But you see, and actually, there's a whole lot of cuts made in here. You don't have a miscut guy in here. Oh, well, that's why. Because it didn't play under 500 yards until the cut was made. So, got to ignore that one. 600 to 650, 0.7. So, the highest number, the majority of the par 5s here at Riviera come from 550 to 6. We'll just leave it at that. So your top performers on par 5s, 550 to 600 yards since the start of the PGA Tour season: Keegan Bradley, Stephan Jaeger, Kevin Tway, Scott Stallings, Wyndham Clark, Nick Taylor, Justin Rose, Hayden Buckley, Colin Morikawa, and Rory McIlroy. So that's going to do it for the Fantasy National portion of the show. Apologies that the par 3s, 4s, and 5s got a little bit rushed, but I do have a lot that I want to show you in Microsoft Excel. So we move to the comparison course chart. I'm going to start you off with the raw numbers. And again, we saw just how important putting was, which makes sense. POA putting is very unique. So guys who generally perform well on POA are specialists. The around the green metric had a little bit of a high outlier way back in 2018. Otherwise, it's been fairly consistent in here, and it's still more important than the average full field course. I'm not going to ignore approach, but it's saying that it is not necessarily as important as some other places. Moving across, again, distance is going to be a big thing, and you have a low outlier. 44% more important here at Riviera, and with a low outlier, that number is just going to go up. Greens, I think this is a little bit misleading. I think it's going to be more important than 3.5% after looking at the prior leaderboards. In fact, you got a pretty low outlier here in 2.49. So what does that change it to? Yeah, 10%. All right, makes sense. So I'm going to be looking at greens. Again, bogey avoidance versus birdies gained. Bogey avoidance has been very, 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 very consistent year over year, which is great to see as a statistician. It has been a very consistent metric year over year, and it is outweighing birdies gained in raw numbers, let alone in the percentage. That's why I believe it's going to be more about bogey avoidance here this week. Par 3s. Again, it says the 150 to 175, 175 to 200. I'm thinking just par 3s in general, because neither of the two most important ranges of par 3s make up half of the total. So I'm thinking just strokes gained par 3. Par 4s, that is a pretty high outlier, but so is this number here for the 450 to 5. And the 400 to 450 has been pretty consistent. So I'm going to do par 4s. I really think it is the 450 to 5, but analytically, 400 to 450 could be something. It could be something. It's saying it's a little less important against all other full field courses, but I don't know. That's been a pretty consistent statistic. So I'm on the fence with myself on that one. Par 5s, not even one full shot, and more than a half comes from 550 to 6, and it's been a very consistent statistic. So we're just going to be looking at 550 to 600 par 5s. Finally, proximity. That's a very big number, but you have a couple of smaller ones too. So prox total seems like it's the thing. We talked about it a little bit last night, 150 to 175. You got some pretty big numbers in these 3 years, but you've also got years where it didn't matter at all. So, again, I'm going with my gut here. I think I'm going to go with prox total like I did with the waste management, and if I'm wrong, I'll own it, because waste management, proximity was not the right choice. There was a specific range. But you see here, 150 to 175, again, the most prevalent approach length is negative in terms of the average full field course. It's saying 175 to 200 and 125 to 150. So I'm just going to go with total prox. But there's a look at Riviera compared to other courses. Before I go to the early look file, this one, I am going to bring up the mixed condition model from last year. So you see, it was decent. Joaquin Niemann was 14th. Again, if the winner's in the top 15 to 20 in my rankings, I consider that, in that specific instance, finding the winner a mild success. As long as they're not way out of view of my top rankings. So I was online there, or in the right area. My top 7 all made the cut. DJ had been struggling coming into that tournament. He generally loved that tournament, but that's why he was rated so high. Luke List, off of his Farmers win a couple of weeks prior. So overall, I would say this was decent. It was better than average, but by no means great. I can absolutely improve on this. I put 10% in strokes gained total difficult to par. So it's 10% that I'm getting back immediately in this year's mixed condition model. But there's a reason why I looked at difficult the whole way through the evening across those metrics tonight. And I'll show you that here in one moment. But there's 10% I'm getting back. I did put 10% in both approach and around the green. Put 10% in POA fast and lightning. Maybe you just go with fast. Hard to say. Look at the strong correlation of bogey avoidance and the guys that generally played well. So that one was good, especially with when it's difficult to par. I did put 10% in proximity, just total procs. That looked like it panned out pretty good. Par 4s, and I separated out the 450 to 5s. I did put 5% driving distance. I'm going to up that. I did put 5% in scrambling when it's difficult. I'm thinking either scrambling on fast POA greens or taking it out entirely. And then I put 5% in par 3s and par 5s. But what I want to show you here is this, and I will zoom in a little bit more. These are those same metrics that we just talked about, but if I were to sort on the top 30, this is the average of what they were coming in. So I will show you that just very, very quickly. So again, if I sort on the actual leaderboard results, with Neiman winning, all the way down to, I believe I went down to Paul Casey. I might have went down to Danny Lee. Did I go to row 28 or 23? It doesn't. I think I went to the top 25. I believe. It's either the top 20 or the top 25, but I believe I went to the top 25. And this is the average of what rank those players were. So in strokes gained total, the top 25 players averaged being 42.48 in that metric. That's pretty good. That's pretty good indicator there. So that's why I felt pretty confident using the difficult filter tonight. You see strokes gained approach was a 53. That's pretty middling. Around the green was a little bit less. Putting, surprisingly, was a little bit less, but we saw that I used fast and lightning. This year, I'm going to just use fast POA greens and see how that does. But you see the bogeys, 47. That's pretty low. Proximity, it's another reason why I'm going with my gut. The proximity was pretty darn correlating or indicative of success from last year. Again, when you sort on the leaderboard. The par 4s, they were okay. Anything under 50 is generally okay. When you get into the 45s, that's starting to be great. The par 4s, 450 to 500, were stellar in terms of correlation or giving us an idea who should play well. Driving distance was, a good factor. Scrambling was not. Par 3s weren't. Par 5s were middling. So that is a look of how the metrics performed in relation to the ending leaderboard and how predictive they were. And that's why, again, just to reemphasize, that's why I was doing a lot of difficult tonight. That's why I'm focusing on the bogeys, because it was a very good indicator, things of that nature. So with that, let's go ahead, move on over very quickly to the early look file. This is the summary of every player who has played the Genesis that's in the field this week, the last 5 years. So Cameron Young, he's only played it one time in the last 5 years. It was last year. He finished second. John Rahm has played it 4 times in the past 5 years. He's averaged a 13th place finish. He's averaged a 3.1, or he's averaged gaining 3.1 strokes off the tee in those 4 years, etc., etc. Just want to see who and what statistics these guys who have been playing the best and or what they've been doing the best, and in the specific statistics, who's been the best here at the Genesis. So let's actually look at putting. Who's been the best putters here at the Genesis the past 5 years? So it goes Luke Donald's only 1 time. Look at that. Uncle Luke still finds a way to make an appearance for you, P. Granted, it's only 1 year, but he putted very well that year. Cameron Young was very good last year. Wyndham Clark, Max Homa, Alex Smalley actually putt very well here despite his mediocre finish. I think he missed the cut, actually. Matt Kuchar's putt well here. Victor Hovland, Kelly Craft, J.B. Holmes, a former winner here. Patrick Rogers, Adam Scott, always seems to perform well at the Genesis. So there's your top putters here at Riviera the past 5 years. We sort on distance, as I feel like that's going to be a pretty big factor. We'll look at distance very quickly. Probably no surprise here. John Rahm, Wyndham Clark, Nick Watney. Okay, that is a surprise. Sepp Straka, Victor Hovland, Lonto Griffin, Ricky, Rory, Cameron Young, Scottie Scheffler. Okay, so not a whole lot of surprise except for maybe Nick Watney. Let's look at greens. Greens, bogeys, and then we'll look at some specific lengths of holes. So greens, top greens regulation players, John Rahm, Colin Morikawa, Cameron Young, who had a spectacular debut last year, Adam Scott, James Hahn, who's always played this event well. Look at where he is in greens. Billy Horschel was very good in greens. He just didn't do anything else apparently that week. Xander Schauffele's always been good with greens here. Finau, Scheffler, Cantlay, Henley, Rogers. There's that list for you. I definitely want to look at bogey avoidance. Yep. So your top bogey avoiders in the past 5 years here at Riviera. Wyndham Clark. Again, Luke Donald's just 1 year. Victor Hovland, John Rahm, Jordan Spieth, Matthew Neesmith's only 2 years, but still. Rory McIlroy, Bo Hostler, Xander, K.H. Lee, Max Homa. Played this event very well. Adam Scott, Matt Kuchar, Morikawa, Finau, Hahn. Okay. I'm going to skip the 3s, probably skip the 5s. I do want to look at 4s and 400 to 450s, but I'm going to do 4s and then just kind of scroll across here. So, again, 1 year it was Cameron Young, but an 11 in strokes gained par 4. Victor Hovland, Adam Scott, John Rahm, Max Homa. You're seeing these same names pop over and over. Xander, Matt Fitzpatrick, Colin Morikawa, Patrick Rogers has played well here. Kelly Craft, interestingly enough. James Hahn. And you look at the 450 to 500, my gosh, 7 of the 11.2, 4.4 of the 7, 4.3 of the 5.6. 450 to 500 looks like it's going to be a pretty big deal. Taylor Moore, granted it's only 1 year, but he gained 5 from 450 to 5 last year. Wyndham Clark, 4.6. 4.6 out of his 4.2. It's just interesting to see that. So, last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to sort on total procs for you all and who's been the best at total procs historically the past 5 years here at Riviera. Aaron Rai last year. But again, Cameron Young, Victor Hovland. There's Gary Woodland. It's only 1 year, and he did not play well. Alex Noren, 4 for 4. It might be the first time we said Alex Noren tonight, coming off a miscut in which I was very high on him at Phoenix. Tony Finau, Colin Morikawa, Justin Thomas, Rory, Adam Scott. Dylan Fratelli's 2 for 4 with a decent amount of success here. Russell Henley, Lonto Griffin, John Rahm. Ches Reeves 3 for 5. although he was pretty low in terms of strokes gained total. But interesting to see he's been good in total procs. So, all right. I'm going to resort this on, well, I thought I was going to. Apparently, I'm just going to go to a whole different workbook. I'm going to sort this on the average finish for you all. So there's a look, again, the past 5 years, who has played the best here at Riviera. That's going to do it for the Data Dive show this evening. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, watched, listened. P, thanks for jumping in chat. I was glad to hear that you had a solid DFS week. I'm sure that is not enough to make up for the fact that you weren't able to go to the waste management like you normally do. But I'm glad it wasn't a losing week, because then that would have just been insult to injury. But thanks for jumping in chat like you always do when you're able to catch the show. Thanks to everyone out there who supports the channel, comments, likes the videos, has subscribed. I always appreciate the support. Looking forward to trying to continue my success and continuing giving you some successful insights and recommendations for DFS, especially as I'm on a bit of a roll here. I've won 3 weeks in a row. We're going to try to keep it 4, or try to go 4 in a row for the Genesis. I'll be at spring training next month instead. You know what? I think I would. That's a pretty tough one, only because I have never been to TBC Scottsdale. I'd like to go just to say I've been and partake. But I'm quite jealous of you being able to go to spring training. I've been in spring training in Florida. I've not been to the Cactus League. So I'm quite jealous of you on that one. But thanks again to everybody who supports the channel. And we're going to see if we can't keep the winning momentum going. For all of the wagers that you have made so far this week for the Genesis Invitational, for all of the wagers you're thinking about making this week for the Genesis Invitational, and until I see you Wednesday evening for the DFS Tactics show, may all your bets be profitable.